Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto is removed from the orphanage and finds Sage of Six Paths Tomb Harem Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. He couldn't really remember when it was he had started coming here. He knew it had been hot, that was about it, the scorching heat of the summer. Noonday sun was not something to be underestimated when one lived in fire country. He remembered searching everywhere. At this time of the day the matron didn't let any of the children back into the orphanage, believing that they needed that time out to play and get some good exercise. It also helped to keep any of the kids from getting too sad at their rather paltry living conditions. The fact was a simple one. When recovering from war and the devastation that a demon will bring to your town, funding an orphanage was hardly the first place that the money was sent. Still, it was a nice enough existence. While most of the children avoided him, usually at the behest of the other workers at the large, though crumbling, home, the matron was always kind to him. He had asked the old man that would visit him from time to time why it was that she was always so nice when the others would ignore him or push him away. He had remembered him smiling a little sadly before saying that the matron was once something called a wet nurse, that she had worked for the cages for years, helping to rear his own sons when they had been small, and now she ran the orphanage. It was on this day, his desperate search for a shady spot that was not taken up by the large dogs the tattooed people would have, or the ones that would always look at the clouds, that he had happened upon a rather strange place not too far out of the village, in the surrounding forests that were still contained by the outer walls of the growing city. The odd little place was surrounded by a low, rotting fence that looked as though that, at one point, it had been pretty, more for look than effect. Pushing aside a rotting bit of bamboo he stepped cautiously inside and was almost instantly swallowed up by overgrown grass and weeds. A boy of no more than 6, he couldn't hope to be taller than these things. Smiling at how much cooler he was feeling already, he had moved deeper into the odd grounds and promptly fell face first to the ground, his tattered sandals catching on something at his feet. Looking closer, and still needing to part the grasses so he could better see, he saw what looked like a large stone, the worn kanji on it unreadable for a number of reasons, first of which being that he couldn't read. He remembered idly cursing the stone before he rose once more and ambled deeper in, his eyes barely spotting what looked like the top of a stone structure through the almost suffocating foliage. As he moved in, careful to dodge around the other stones that seemed laid out in something of a pattern, he came to the base of the structure, his eyes widening in shock at what lay before him. The whole of the thing was large, if worn. Its yellowed and rough stone showing that it was at one point a thing of beauty, water-worn and windswept effigies all but lost to time. However, it was the large door, flanked by odd statues that had caught his eye. Each of the large, man-looking stone sculptures were standing tall, arms before them in what looked to be, at one point, the pose for holding something quite large. The faces of the men were long washed away, but the odd hoods they seemed to have worn were still somewhat there, though he could see where they had been broken before being further weathered. Putting them aside for the moment, he peered deeper inside the doorway and smiled to himself. It was dark, cool, hidden from sight and hard to find. Perfect clubhouse. Casting one last look about the area, a brilliant smile lighting up his whisker-marked face, he dashed inside, almost instantly being engulfed in darkness and a comforting cool, slightly damp air. Letting out a sigh of contentment, he looked around the darkened room and saw that he couldn't see very deep inside at first, his eyes slow to adapt as he moved closer to the walls, his little hands coming up to run along the stone as a guide. Adorning the wall in many neat columns were odd pictures, most painted in badly faded inks and flaking stone inlay. Some images were of birds, others of people, some looked like plants or other animals or odd symbols. It was all more than a little strange for the young blonde. Slowly he moved deeper, this time being a bit more careful of the walls. The matron had always said, if it looked old, don't touch. Slipping his hands into hole-ridden pockets, he moved closer to a large picture that seemed to be in far better shape. It still had a lot of the same images on it, but he could at least tell that it was some kind of a battle. He saw men with odd hats and long, pointy sticks on horse-drawn carriages, rows and rows of people with odd clothing and bizarre things in their hands. The things were big when compared to the people, almost as large as they were in some cases. The parts they were holding in two hands were almost as long as their arms, with a strangely shaped, curved second half to them, kinda like the hooked knives that the farmers used, but they looked like they were holding them facing the wrong way. Moving a little further, he saw those same images. This time they looked to be fighting some strange creature. The thing was massive and darkly colored, something he couldn't hope to make out in the dim light, but what he did see was that it had 10 weird little tail things coming off of it. The images showed the men swinging the odd things, cutting pieces off of the monster as the ones in the carriages charged and stabbed at the legs. Another picture showed row after row of men with strangely curved-looking sticks with strings in their hands, sticks that could fire other pointy sticks. Pictures showed a huge number of the pointy sticks raining down on the beast. He couldn't remember being more excited in his life. Only the matron would read him stories, and even then she only told boring ones about dogs or living cookies. Right here before him was a giant picture book showing people fighting a real monster. Hardly able to keep his steps steady, he ran to the next picture and gasped. This picture showed the monster again, this time next to a bunch of strange-looking triangles and other buildings, some like the big tower in the middle of the village, only pointier, others like the faces on the mountain. The thing that was scary was he saw just how big the creature was compared to these buildings, and how small the people were next to them. The next picture showed the huge thing with its tails pointing all over, and a ball of fire coming from its mouth, destroying the buildings and killing the people. Naruto felt a flash of anger and sadness wash over him. Was this what these stories were like? They were supposed to be heroes beating the monsters, but all these people were dying. With a slight pout, he moved up to the next picture and gasped. There, standing on top of one of the weird, Hokage mountain-like buildings, was a really pretty woman, pretty like that purple-haired girl he had seen going to the academy and her red-eyed friend. This one looked like she had long black hair, a strange thing on her head like some of the other people on the carriages, but hers was even fancier. It looked to wrap around the back of her head and kind of fan out, and covered the top of her head completely, like when some of the kids would put pots on their heads and played samurai. At her forehead there was a picture of two snakes wrapping around each other to make a neat little symbol. She was wearing what looked like a long, white dress, like the people with the white eyes would wear. In one hand was a long stick with a snake on it, and her other hand had a big claw. She was standing on top of the mountain alone, all the other people hiding behind her as the monster came at her. That was the end. It was too dark to see more. The young blonde wanted to scream, it wasn't fair. How did it end? He'd never heard of a pretty lady being the hero in a story, now he found one and he couldn't find out what happened. This is the worst day ever. Kicking at the dust at his feet, Naruto slowly started making his way back towards the entrance, the doorway so bright that it was hurting his eyes. Squinting at the sudden pain, his foot caught something, making him spill onto the floor and let out a yelp as he scraped his knee. Rubbing the damaged limb vigorously, he glared at what he had tripped on. His eyes widened. A hall. Best clubhouse ever. With a massive grin, the boy sprang back to his feet, unmindful of his slight limp, and made his way down the side passage. As he moved a bit deeper, and seeing that the hall lacked all forms of lighting, he knew he wouldn't be getting far without risking getting lost in the surprisingly large building, never noticing that as he moved deeper the hall would tilt downwards. Just as he was about to give up his exploring for the day, he spotted it, something large and white that seemed to soak up what little light was in the room. There, before him, sitting on a large, slightly glittering chair, was the woman from the picture. Shock and no small amount of fear washed over him as he stared up at the woman, one hand still holding her odd staff, the other brought up over her heart and showing the long, two-pronged claw he had seen from the mural. Wow. Are you real? As his words echoed through the room, he felt a slight chill sweep over him, like someone had just rubbed ice over the back of his neck. Quickly casting a look around him, he crept closer to the throne. I saw your picture. You were fighting the monster, right? I couldn't see the rest. Could you tell me what happened? As he finally got close enough to really make her out, he saw that she wasn't really there. Well, she was, but she was just a statue. Oh, I guess you can't, can you? Throwing up his hands in frustration, he sat down at the foot of the marble statue and let out a sigh. I wish you were here. I really want to meet a hero, like you, or the fourth Hokage. He was the greatest. He beat a giant fox monster and, giving a slight chuckle at his own antics, he let a smile linger. That had been the first time he had talked to her about things in his life, and it had become quite the habit. When he had returned that evening to find the matron worried sick, he just smiled and said he had found a great spot to stay cool and lost track of time exploring. She had scolded him for a while, then put him right to bed after a bit of food. That was another thing he was always thankful for. She had always made sure he got enough to eat. The others that would run the food line, or sometimes just the bullies, would always take his good or give it to others. He used to complain about it, but after a while he had given up. Besides, when the matron would take him aside for his stories, she would have warm tea and some little cakes for him, and those were always better than the thin soup that they had to eat. Before he knew it, 4 years had passed. Almost daily he would make his way back to his little hiding place, squirreling away all his little trinkets he would find, make or be given as the years passed, all of them backed by the statue of his goddess. Well, after he had seen all the murals, courtesy of a small lantern given to him by the Hokage, he couldn't call her anything else. The last of the pictures showed the woman using strange rays of light in her claws to fight the beast, but she ended up being stabbed, it seemed, by one of the tails. As she lay at the beast's feet, there was another man that showed up, somehow trapping the monster in a large ball that was torn from the ground before it was thrown into the sky. The last mural, which dominated the far back wall, was of a scene at night, showing the moon. The whole of their city, if not her people, were in ruins. He knew there was something of them that had lived. This tomb was proof of that, but with no way of reading the script, or even finding out the name of the woman on the throne, then he was largely out of luck. At the time he thought it was a good, fitting name, Megami, and as the years passed it just seemed to grow so by the day. He was hoping that title would mean something today. Making his way through the overgrown grass once more, his head now visible above it, he made his way back into the tomb, down the corridors, whispering his greetings to the ghosts of memories that filled the halls. The dusty floors that had once muted his steps were now cleanly swept and carefully cleaned. Interspaced along the walls, away from prying eyes that may catch the light from outside, were more of the lamps that he had managed to buy or trade for over the years, setting them where it looked torches would have once stood. Making his familiar turn, he found what had, seemingly, always been there, his goddess he had found 4 years ago. Hey Megami-chan, it's me again. Taking a moment to light a pair of lamps, causing the large room to glow in the artificial light, and showing her in her true magnificence, he stepped closer before settling to the floor beside her, a lamp at each side of the throne. Once he had gotten light in here, he had been shocked at what he had found. There was the form of his goddess, perfectly smooth and immaculately detailed marble adorned in riches the likes of which he knew he would never see elsewhere in his life, sitting atop a golden throne that had been encrusted in jewels made to look like beetles, serpents and scorpions. Her body, seemingly, was once covered in cloth, as the statue was quite, save for her headdress and a section of upper armor, bracers, belt and greaves. Her face itself had deserved immortalization, if he had anything to say about it. Perfect cheekbones, slightly tapered chin giving her an air that reminded him of delicate porcelain, a gently curved nose and a regal mouth that at the same time, he imagined, had the gentlest voice he could imagine. The chest armor was in a large half circle made of straight bands, not unlike the feathers of a bird, alternating blood red metal and some kind of green stone that he knew was valuable. The odd armor then swept up her throat in the same alternating bands. Her hair was cast in stone as well, a lusterless black that was well manicured and shone in the light of the room in brilliant contrast to the rest of her form, the black stone almost drinking in the light even as it shined. The crown she wore styled in the same fusion as her chest armor, though the solid green stone serpents caught the light in a way that made them seem a lighter shade. Wrapped around each of her arms were more of the snakes with two long belt knives at her thighs had a deep, purple stone inset in the pommel and the hilt. The knives, sheaths adorned in a shining yellow metal that he just knew had to be gold as well as more of the black stone flanking a central strip of gold. Naruto pulled his knees to his chest, hugging them tightly as he rested his head on them, unmindful of his nicest set of clothing, dark brown pants and a black shirt the old man had bought him, getting dust all over them. She's gone, Megami-kan, she's gone and now I'm all alone. The old man won't have time to come see me. The new matron kicked me out with just these clothes, and these, I stole them from Saw the matron's room. They were her favorite hairpins. Naruto pulled the little set of jade combs from his pocket, one of the tines broken from the outer edge, probably from where they forced him from the home. The top of the artfully carved combs showed a single lily, inlaid with some kind of white stone. Megami-chan, if you can you keep an eye on her? She was always really nice to me. Taking a moment to turn the little combs over in his hands, he rose and reached up to slip the combs just below the crown by her hair, the ornaments staying and letting the lighter stone shine in the light reflected from her hair. I don't know if she'd want you to have them, but I do. You're the most important person in the world to me. Looking up into the endless black depths of the statue's eyes, the hollow void seeming to draw him in, he fidgeted. Is it all right if I stay here tonight? Till I can find somewhere else. Taking the silence as an affirmation, he settled into the statue's lap and curled in on himself. Life, it seems, was just too cruel. Time has an odd effect on people. Some become more attuned to their surroundings and those they are with over the years. Others will gain wisdom, able to give you some of the best advice you can imagine or possess a singular insight into situations. Still more will either become calm and cool, able to calculate and understand situations as well as people, but possessing a cold logic, uncaring of the human element. Naruto, over the next 6 years he would gain a bit of it all. Empathy for those that were not unlike him. Outcasts are those that have suffered so much that they just disconnect. Insight into situations and conflict that only an outsider can glean, and a calmness when he focused that would belie the large reserves of energy he possessed. This last aspect is what those in the academy would know him for. While he was no Nara, he did currently hold a solid position in the middle of the pack, something that was obvious to the teachers as the blonde would only answer half of his tests or not bother to throw all his weapons. He knew what he needed to pass, and he didn't want to draw any undue attention to himself. He was under no delusions that people were more than a little confused as to how he had survived so long after the orphanage had kicked him out. Eventually the Hokage had found him, got him signed off as an adult and given an apartment as well as a stipend to live off on, but upon arriving he had made a decision and instead got a new teacher, a chunin named Iruka, to get him a few storage scrolls and quickly packed up everything he could and returned to the safety of the tomb. It was odd, ever since he had asked Megami if he could stay there it had seemed all the more welcoming, the light from his lamps seeming to reach that much further, the food he would cook would taste that much better. Not wishing to impose on his goddess he set up his bed and things in another of the chambers that he had found in the structure. That was another thing that had really surprised him. Every time he went to try and explore, something new he would seemingly be there for him to stumble upon, new halls, tunnels, recesses or even whole chambers. In one place there were giant statues that reached the ceiling, each one bearing a strange, animal-like head, birds, dogs, lizards and snakes, 8 of them in total each holding massive weapons that would decimate anything they fought. Another room seemed to be an armory of sorts, holding more of those oddly shaped swords. What he learned were bows and spears. Opposite of them were row upon row of shields and other smaller hand weapons. Throughout it all, he remembered the matron's words, "If it's old, don't touch it." He was no fool. When he had really gotten into exploring the tomb, he came to understand that it was far larger than he thought it was, the halls and chambers twisting deeper and deeper underground and hooking back in on itself so it didn't become a sprawling complex. The only thing that kept it from being found by the sewer workers was its position so far away from houses or businesses. Still, it was a great place to live, especially after he had, officially, moved in. Every day after his classes he would head back to the apartment and linger for a few hours. Always studying or working on his chakra control, at least until he was certain that he had no more prying eyes on him. Then he would slip out through the roof access he had and would make his way through back alleys and tall grasses, using the time to work on his stealth, then would have a simple supper before more training, the larger chambers, halls, staircases and materials in the tomb affording plenty of training opportunities. Hay bale targets, a stone pillar that he would carefully wrap with a spare futon to use as a striking post, long, twisting hallways and steep stairs for speed and reaction training, stones and rope to add weight to his body for physical training. Indeed, the tomb afforded him all he needed. He had even found, in one of the larger halls that held more ceremonial-looking weapons, images on the walls that acted something like a manual, showing fighting styles both with and without weapons, quickly showing the blonde, albeit in an abstract fashion, how his stances should look, how to wield the large weapons as well as the small. He did think at times that the place seemed closed in, stuffy, but whenever he would think that he would see all the images and murals that showed the life of these people and would smile a little. He may not understand the language, but he still felt, somehow, like a part of them, learning their styles, taking up some of their dress, honoring the statues that even he could understand held a religious meaning to them. That was something that had always confounded the teachers. Every time he would rush home and seem to hit the books, never training physically, so how was it that he was getting so strong? Where did his fighting style come from? Then there was his clothing. Over the long years he had began to adopt the calm, regal look that he had seen on the statues of the tomb, a look that was rather unnerving in one so young. Even the clothing had come to reflect his new mentality. Rather than wearing t-shirts and shorts, pants or even mesh shirts or jackets, he instead kept himself wrapped in a long, pale brown cloak, as though he were traveling through Suna, then when he got to class would take it off. Beneath it he wore a simple, white tunic with a curious half cape over his shoulder, gathered at the chest with a wooden clasp in the shape of a scorpion, leavening his arms bare and showing the results of long hours of hard work. Simple loose pants tied at the ankles and a woven reed sandal finished off the odd look. The clothing was simple, and shockingly effective. On one side it was a soft white linen, on the other was a deep black, shrouding him as he would need. Due to all the heavy training he did, inside and out, he had a moderate tan that helped to hide him in the foliage of the village even better than the so-called experts in their class, only needed to use a bit of wet ash to break his pattern and move deeper, vanishing almost entirely from the teacher's view. So it was that he had become as much of an enigma as he was known. Finally, the day of the graduation exams had come and he knew he would have little to worry about. The intensive training he had been doing using a variation of the leaf balancing exercise had ensured that he had enough control to use the bunchen. He had been one of the first to understand and use both the substitution and the transformation techniques. His variation was simple. He sent out a small amount of chakra into the sands that coated the floor of the tomb and would then slowly pull it back once it had infused the earth. Pulling it with his chakra and keeping a small amount cycling through the area, keeping the sand or dirt clinging to his body before pushing it further up, eventually letting it cover more and more until he felt his control start to waver, then would push just that little bit more, forcing him to adapt and his control to grow, before he would move out of the tomb and drop it off. Then he did it all over again. Day in and day out. Alright Naruto, you're up, first the henge, then the kawarimi, then 3 bunshin. Yes, Iruka sensei. Now just try your best, Naruto-kun. Go slow and try and relax. Yes, Mizuki-sensei. The pair that sat before him always mildly unnerved him, but they also never went out of their ways to bother him, something he was thankful for. First he made a simple ram symbol, focused his chakra into a shell around him and willed it to take the shape he desired, in this case Mizuki-sensei, complete with the little rag he would wear on his head that sported his headband. Next he swapped himself with one of the logs provided for the class for their substitutions, though some part of him noticed that the pull was off, that it seemed to take more chakra than it should. Still, he poured more into it and succeeded with his swap and moved on. Last came the bunshin, something he had pulled off every time in class without fail, yet still, he felt that odd pull, that more chakra was needed than should have. A clone required a level of finesse that could be troublesome should he just pour more into it like he had with the kawarimi. Stopping his channeling of chakra for a moment he looked to his teachers. Forgive me, Iruka-sensei, may I ask a question? Iruka had to hide the small smile that threatened to take over his features. Naruto had always been quite respectful of those that had earned it, and apparently he had ingrained himself to the youth when he had first been approached by the boy. He knew he had had a hard time of things, failing the first 2 years at the academy before his removal from the orphanage, and wanted to help the struggling student as much as he could. To his joy, the boy had taken to his lessons with a thriving passion, taking every session to heart and remembering things instantly that were taught in his first year, that others couldn't recall with the help of their notes in the books. Of course, go ahead, Naruto-kun. Sensei, it seems as though I'm having trouble focusing my chakra today. It's probably just the nerves. If it takes a few moments longer, will I be failed? Mizuki looked ready to speak, but Iruka raised a calming hand. While yes, this test is in your proficiency in the technique, recognizing your limitations in the field and adapting is just as important. Also, you're the last one to be tested today, so take your time. Both Iruka and Naruto chuckled at the little joke before the blonde nodded and carefully started to gather his chakra, paying attention to the rate of the odd pull that he was feeling coming from all around him, like something was trying to drain his chakra. Finally understanding the rate that he was losing the chakra, Naruto quickly flew through the 3 hand signs needed for the technique and, with only a slight pulse at the end to up the number, released the chakra, causing the room to fill with smoke for a moment. The instructors were stunned for a full minuet. They had required only 3 clones, yet Naruto had just produced over 20 of the illusionary blondes. Naruto, well done. I can see that you still need to work on your control, but you did an excellent job in making your clones. I'm proud to say that you graduate. Come up and get your headband, ninja of Konoha. Naruto gave a small bow. His face split into a wide grin as he moved up and took a pale white headband, something that matched his clothing, and wrapped it securely around his forehead. He spared Iruka a small smile for the thoughtfulness of keeping one of the white ones in reserve for him before he moved back outside to wait with the others. Seeing the others all happily greeting parents, siblings or guardians caused a slight twinge in his heart. Absently he thought back to the matron, how those little combs would look in her russet hair, the kind twinkle in her green eyes as she would sit him on her knee and read to him, the little cakes she would make. At the same time he thought back to his goddess and smiled. Her gaze was always on him in the tomb. Somehow he knew it, as insane as it sounded, and he knew she would be proud of him. He couldn't wait to get home to tell her. He heard snippets of conversations drifting through the crowd, some of praise, others commenting on where they thought they would rank, all very normal. Then there were the ones directed, somewhat, at him. The half-muttered insults or comments of amazement that they would let a freak like him pass. Again, it was all very normal. When they were all called back inside, Iruka told them about needing to be back at school this time next week in order to get their team assignments as well as further instructions on their expectations on their new positions as ninja of the village. The whole of the class was walking a bit taller that day as they started to file out. Those that had failed were somewhat buoyed by Iruka's insistence that there was always next year, and that not everyone could pass, as there simply weren't enough instructors to go around. As Naruto was about to leave, opting to be the last for his own reasons, Iruka approached him and clapped a hand on his cloaked shoulders. "Hey Naruto, how about I take you out for a bit of ramen to celebrate, my treat?" Naruto let a smile play across his features and gave a small nod. "I'd like that, Iruka-sensei. Just let me go drop off some of my things and take care of some stuff. I'll meet you there in a few hours, is that alright?" The scarred Chunin gave a small note and patted him on the shoulder before they parted ways. Naruto, feeling the twinge of excitement for the first time in many long months, rushing back to his home, he made a show of lingering before moving to one of his many little escape hatches, and started making a meandering path back to his goddess, mindful of prying eyes that were quickly taking note of his new head ornament and made a few extra feints, should people try and follow him, like on his birthday. Finally reaching his home, he moved cautiously inside, carefully sidestepping the traps he had lain and turning on a nearby lantern before moving deeper. Reaching the statue of Megami, he smiled, a radiant thing made all the brighter by the well-manicured room, the figure that dominated its center. Putting his things aside, close to one of the little hiding places just outside of the chamber, moved closer to the throne before dropping to one knee and bowed his head, arms crossing at his chest as he had seen some of the people in the murals do. "Megami-chan, I've done it, the first step to becoming recognized, and perhaps one day, the leader of this village. I've become a warrior after all these years, and it was thanks to you that I could come as far as I have. You were there when no one else was, when I was seeking comfort from the villagers or the weather, when people were cruel to me, denying me food or affection, when the matron died. I promise you, Megami-chan, that I will eventually learn all I can about this place, and if I can, I want to bring our people back to the world. I swear it on my life, this one or the next, I'll find a way to make your sacrifice known." Rising from his kneeling position, he got a bit closer to the statue, a part of him thinking that it was smiling at him as his eyes were drawn to the small combs he had placed there so long ago, a flash of the original owner coming to his mind as he reached up and laid a gentle hand on the smooth stone cheek, his eyes going back to the statue's empty gaze before he let his thumb ghost over the marble. Letting out something of a heavy sigh, he stepped back and was about to turn and make his way towards Ichiraku's ramen bar when he heard it. A soft, almost unnoticeable click, then the sliding of stone. Looking back, Naruto was more than a little confused. In all his time here, he had yet to hear anything like it before. Yes, he had found passages that had seemingly been closed before, but this was wholly different. Looking at the throne for a time, he then started making a slow circle around it, looking for the source of the sound, part of him terrified that he had damaged it in some way. After making a full circuit 3 times, he then started looking around the rest of the room when he spotted it. There, just beside the throne and close to the ground, was a small handle jutting up from the flood of the tomb. He had to have stepped over it twice without noticing it. Cursing himself slightly, he looked back into the marble face before glancing at the handhold again. He looked back to Megami in confusion, questioning her about what he should do. Silence was his answer. With a trembling hand, he took a hold of the stone handle. He set his feet firmly and pulled. Slowly the stone started to move, a great grinding sound filling the chamber before a stone pillar just larger than his fist reached the height of his hips. Again he looked to Megami and released the handle, his eyes widening in shock as he saw the stone grip slowly recede into the pillar. As the handle vanished back into the stone, the seam so fine that it could hardly be noticed anymore despite his careful eyes, the whole of the chamber gave a slight shudder, sending a large cloud of dust into the air. Coughing and sputtering slightly, Naruto struggled to see what was happening through the now hazy room, and to his shock the large throne had shifted slightly. No longer did it dominate the center of the room, but now it stood slightly off, as though something else should be in the chamber with it. His curiosity was rewarded when he saw a section of the large stone panels that dominated the floor slowly move aside and a platform arose. Naruto's eyes grew wide, for a moment unmindful of the dust that now stung at his vision as he saw an elegant golden crown rise up until it was almost at chest height. The whole of the things was covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs, a husk of a single scorpion lying next to it. It was designed not unlike how Megumi's was, at least in coloration and basic structure, but that was where the similarity ended. This crown lacked the twin serpents at the forehead, instead having something that reminded him of a rising sun in a way. What looking like two wings swept up and outwards and set between the two was a circular disc of thin, orange stone that allowed the light to pass through it. The circlet portion and had the same red to green stone and metal that his goddess had, though the rising wings were styled in silvers, golds and the same dark stone that made up Megumi's hair. Naruto stood in awe of the crown for a time, admiring its beauty for an unknown amount of time. Slowly he stepped forward and reached out for it before staying his hand. Taking a moment to undo his headband, he dropped it, utterly forgotten, to the ground before he took up the crown in shaking hands and turned it over and around, looking it over from every angle. Is this, for me? Silence was his answer. With a surprisingly steady hand he placed the crown on his head and gasped as a sudden heat rushed through his body. With his eyes screwed shut and grit teeth he endured what felt like liquid steel being poured into his veins before dropping to his knees panting, the heat that seemed to linger within him settling into his stomach and mind, churning slightly as he slowly rose to his feet and reached up to the crown. To find nothing. Frantic, Naruto looked around the chamber before his eyes locked back onto the platform that once held it, then to the statue of his goddess, and let a sad smile overcome him even as a single tear rolled down his cheek. I guess I wasn't supposed to have it. Forgive me for acting out of turn, my goddess. Absently whipping the tear from his face, he stooped and picked up his headband, tying it securely over his head, not unlike how he saw many in the murals wearing their headdresses before snatching up the bit of money he had squirreled away, intent on buying an extra bowl of ramen tonight to help settle his nerves, before giving one last bow to the statue and, extinguishing a lantern, left the tomb for the ramen stand. The whole of the night he had been dwelling on the strange occurrence in his home this night. It had made little sense, had it even happened at all. There were no signs of the crown at all, though he still felt the slight tingle in his fingertips from where he held it, the weight on his brow of the metal and stone, the elation he felt at being given a gift by his goddess. Then the crushing despair of having it all taken away. The ramen had been largely tasteless to him this night, while it had never been his favorite food this night it just seemed that much more empty. Maybe he should have tried dango. Still, the company had been nice. The trio had easily picked up on his rather somber mood and had done their best to cheer him up, all intent on what would make the rather upbeat teen seem so down. He just smiled and told them it was nothing before going back to his meal. He didn't get any extra ramen that night after all. His musings had been interrupted however when an Anbu arrived to give Iruka a set of orders, the whispered command making the Chunin pale before he quickly tossed some bills onto the bar top and rushed off. Apologizing for his abrupt departure, he quickly leapt to the rooftops and made a mad dash to the tower. Exchanging worried glances with Ayame and Tuki, he wished the two a good night and started making his way back to his home, unmindful of stealth at this later hour, especially considering that most of the ninja force was apparently scrambled for some form of mission, the civilians all hidden in their homes in fear of what may be going on. Reaching the tomb, he was just getting ready to head inside when he spotted it. The disturbed grasses that showed that someone other than him had been there. The light of the waning moon enough for him to see the clear signs of heavy footfalls that lay down the almost reed-like grasses that surrounded the tomb's entrance. Steeling himself, Naruto pulled a pair of kunai from the weapon pouches hidden in the layers of his kilt-like clothing and slid into one of the loose stances he had learned from the tomb, one hand above his head, elbow bend while the other was pulled loosely to his side, not unlike those who were ready for a solid straight punch, but with his blades held firmly in place for the thrust. With slow, gliding steps he moved around the outside of the little graveyard and, seeing the direction that the tracks had gone quickly moved after them, intent on finding out just who it was that may have discovered his home. As he moved deeper into the forest, his ears started to pick up the telltale signs of battle, steel ringing off of steel in the distance as well as the steady, thumping claps of flesh impacting flesh. Gritting his teeth, he crept closer and had froze. There, poised over Iruka with a short sword, was Mizuki, a set of massive shuriken at his back and a large scroll propped against a tree close by. I have to say, Iruka, you put up a better fight than I thought you would for a simple, career teacher. Most of us only put up with those snot-nosed little shits as part of the duty, but you honestly like the little brats, don't you? Iruka grunted as Mizuki placed a foot on his chest, causing broken ribs to grind painfully in his chest. More than I ever did you, Tem. If anything, Mizuki's smirk grew. Ah, you wound me, Iruka-kun. Wasn't I your best friend, your teammate? You're a traitor. With a lazy tilt of his head, the silver-haired teacher avoided Iruka's bit of phlegm, spitting. Is that all you can do? I expected more. Mizuki stooped lower and brought the short sword to the man's throat. Any last words? A small trickle of blood flowed from his mouth before a small smile graced his lips. Yeah, behind you. The traitor's laugh was long and loud. Seriously. Behind you. That's the best you can come up with. The man's eyes widened as he felt the steel slicing into his flesh. Just above his kidneys, a pair of knives had found their mark. Staggering back, he turned and spotted the oddly dressed blonde, his hands passing back into his strange skirt and pulling another set of blades. You. Me. Naruto let fly with another pair, his perfect aim spoiled by the man tossing himself forward and rolling away. Even as he moved, he pulled one of the massive shuriken and brought it before him as a shield, the knives that had wounded him falling away with the sudden movement. Not for the first time, he was happy about the thick vest and how effective it could be at slowing blades and limiting wounds. What could have been a deadly blow was now little more than a nuisance that he knew he would have to treat before he made his final escape from the village. Missed me, demon brat. Did I? Who says it was you I was aiming at? Mizuki stiffened as he heard the sound of steel slicing through the air and spun, whirling the large shuriken in his hand and deflecting the somewhat clumsy throw of his teacher. My, Iruka-sensei, that was poor form, C+. Despite the situation, he smirked at his student. You try throwing straight with broken ribs. Sobering a bit, he forced himself to his feet, one hand absently holding his chest. Naruto, go to the village and get help. Mizuki's stolen a scroll with forbidden techniques and must be stopped. I'll slow him down. With a curt nod, Naruto turned to follow his orders, understanding that if this should fall into the wrong hands, it would cost many more lives than that of one Chunin and one Genin. Oh, are you sure about that, Iruka-kun? After all, this scroll holds some rather interesting things about our blonde here. Mizuki, don't say another word. As it stands, you may get life in prison, but if you tr. Oh, I think I'd rather take death. Those cells are just dank. Now then, Naruto-kun, would you like to know a secret? No, you mustn't. Naruto's confusion was almost palpable as he turned back to the clearing to see Iruka trying to force his legs into propelling himself forward, but if the blood coming from his mouth was any indication, then the scared Chunin was already in serious trouble. Mizuki just stood with a sadistic grin as he stared at Naruto. Oh, but Iruka, don't you think that your favorite student deserves to know the reason he's hated? Why no one would adopt him? Why it was that he was given such a crappy little apartment and so little money to live off of? What? Naruto, don't listen to him. He's just going to lie to you. A sickening choking sound filled the clearing as Iruka dropped to his knees, arms wrapped around his chest as he coughed up a gout of blood. Naruto was moving before he realized it, trying to get to his sensei's side only to have the large shuriken impact the ground before him, stopping the blonde dead in his tracks as Mizuki pulled the other large blade. Now, let your elders finish speaking before you act. Naruto, if you knew the truth, then you would hate this village as much, no, maybe more than Orochimaru-sama himself. Naruto, you are the nine-tailed fox. The teenage blonde froze. He was a demon. Suddenly all the looks, but muttered comments, the people at the orphanage, it all made sense. That's why no one wanted him. That's why Megami rejected him. Naruto, it's not true. The fourth, he sealed it. For Iruka, the world went dark. That gave him pause. That marking on his stomach he couldn't understand, it was a seal. He wasn't the fox, it was inside him, but that didn't make him it any more than it making it him. Turning cold, blue eyes on Mizuki, he felt his chakra spike as his emotions surged. And that odd warmth that had been stirring in the back of his mind and stomach grew hotter. As his chakra peaked, the massive wave of blue energy becoming a visible thing around him, something that shocked the former Chunin to no end. He felt it, the same white-hot burning coursing through his body and penetrating his mind, his vision filling with spots before things started to become clear. Visions of sandy plains and magnificent structures that stretched to the horizon. Images of artfully sculpted and carved statues and columns. He possessed the knowledge. He possessed the power. The strength to lead, the wisdom to rule, it was all his. Mizuki watched with sinister glee as Naruto's chakra went berserk, unmindful of the fact that it could probably be felt miles away. He only cared about the boy's suffering right now. Hell, if he pushed him just that little bit more, he might break the seal and let the demon ravage the village once more. Orochimaru-sama would be so proud. As he watched, idly spinning the shuriken as he debated on how to make Naruto go that much further, he saw it. The chakra that was visible seemed to pull back, rather than spiking around him and kicking up the earth and leaves around them. It instead seemed to surround him like a cold fire. Slowly Naruto rose from his slightly hunched posture, icy blue eyes locking on him before he rose to his full height. You, who would dare to use the sacrifices of another to fuel your own deeds, you who would injure friends in the name of power, you who would spit on your home for personal gain, you are an insult to all that you may have stood for, and those who would wear the mantle of traitor, are forfeit. He quirked an eyebrow at that, a smirk playing across his lips. Oh, well spoken, but tell me, Genin, what will you do to stop me? There was no smile, no hard words, only a sense of pity around the blonde as he looked at Mizuki. I am no mere Genin, where we are, I rule. With that, Naruto extended his hand. And all Mizuki knew about the world changed. The Chunin could only watch in mild confusion as Naruto extended one hand, the chakra coalescing and seeming to pool, making a brilliant blue sphere that reminded him of the legends of the Yondaime. Naruto then simply turned over his hand, and let the ball fall. As the orb impacted the ground, he was startled to feel the earth shake slightly, a pulse of blue chakra racing through the landscape faster than he could even begin to react to. Looking around him for a moment, he grinned. Nothing had happened. Ha! Leave it to the mediocre boy to waste kra. Looking back up at Naruto, he was stunned. There, where the boy's headband had once been, was a very strange hat of some kind, a muted red and green thing that seemed to shimmer and waver as he turned his head, as though it wasn't quite there. Following his line of sight, he saw him looking at one of the little clearings, a largely bare patch that he had been sitting on trying to decipher some of the jutsu in the scroll before he had been so rudely interrupted. There, in the earthen patch, something stirred. Mizuki gripped his shuriken a bit tighter as something seemed to travel through the earth, swirling slightly, as though it were softening it somehow. When he felt it, a deep shudder in the ground once more, like something had broken deep beneath the earth. Sentinels at the portal of eternity, mighty guardians of the king. Arise. Mizuki felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. King. Guardians. The earth shifted, and a carefully bandaged hand appeared from the ground. What are you doing? What kind of jutsu is th? Mizuki was cut off as a long, bronze blade erupted from now sandy soil, the oddly curved thing looking like a katana blade that was far too broad, curving back down to still be hidden by the ground. The hand that had emerged gripped at the earth as best it could, seeming to pull itself up slowly. More and more of the cruel-looking weapon began to emerge, then what looked to be a golden serpent, and a bleached white helmet. Mizuki let out a keening wail as he watched this thing pull itself from the earth. That wasn't a helmet. It was the top of a skull. More and more began to appear. Thick, bronze armor, the body wrapped in tattered bandages that did nothing to hide the pale ones beneath it. A thick belt with a skull at its heart and something like a loin cloth. Mizuki backpedaled quickly from the skeletal warrior that was now almost fully free before seeming to notice that he still had his weapon, his fear at the moment blinding him to all else before he suddenly felt the comforting weight in his hands once more. Quickly he snapped his wrist, spinning it quickly and turning it into a great saw before throwing it with all the strength he could muster, the thing rotating in the air and finding its mark. The sounds of brittle, shattering branches filled the air as the shuriken tore through the skeleton's chest, shattering ribs and sending the bronze armor scattering across the clearing, its arms falling away as its head rolled across the ground to come to rest before him. With a victorious cry he brought one foot down, shattering it into nothingness. Pathetic demon. You think something like this could beat me? I'm a Chunin. Nothing short of an army can stop me. Naruto just looked at him impassively for a moment before slightly nodding, an almost regal act, as you wish. Mizuki froze as he heard that same odd clattering and shifting of the earth before turning. There, standing in almost perfect military formations, were another dozen of the warriors, all holding the same, massive curved swords, each as long as they were tall, but each were held easily, as though they possessed all the strength in the world. As one the skeletons stepped forward, and began to spread out. Mizuki leapt onto one of the surrounding branches, watching as the things began to fan out, taking positions at the foot of each of the trees. One of them, this one holding his massive blade easily in one hand, the other with an equally large emerald green shield, moved up to the scroll that he still had propped against a tree. He cursed as the warrior dropped the shield to scoop up the scroll, quickly making its way over to Naruto. With a roar he pulled a brace of kunai and let fly. However, to his dismay, the iron darts only clattered weakly off the bones before falling to the earth. He would have to go bigger. Quickly the Chunin began to move though hand signs, Doden, Doryuso. He slammed his palms into the trunk of the tree, willing his chakra to race through the wood and into the earth. At once the newly churned ground seemed to flow, coming together and hardening before lashing out, forming several massive spears that pierced through the warrior and shattering him not unlike how his shuriken had. With a triumphant grin he pulled another set of kunai, ready to throw them at the blonde when he felt the tree he was on shudder. Looking down he felt his jaw hang loose, the entire trunk of the massive thing had shifted, the mark of a shockingly clean cut that had lain the tree low clear even in the dim light. Quickly the Chunin made to jump again only to gasp in horror. All the other trees around him were falling as well. One of the prime rules of war, if the enemy goes to ground, leave no ground to go to. His eyes widened at the voice whispering into his ear as he felt a foot planted firmly in his floating rib, the bone giving under the force of the strike as he was propelled to the ground, slamming painfully into his own hardened spears, only luck saving him from being skewered. With a growl he made to rise only to feel an icy grip on his wrist. Looking up in confusion he lets out another whimper of pure fear. There, staring back into brown eyes, were the soulless black voids of a skull. His free hand came around hard, kunai still gripped tightly and pierces the bone cleanly through its odd circlet, the golden serpent falling away just as the head did. But still it did not let go. Stabbing again and again at the hand he was only managing glancing blows when he heard it, the shifting of earth under feet. Turning slowly he saw them, the whole group, now almost 20 strong, surrounding him, their blades held high to strike. I will give you one last chance, surrender. Alright, I yield. A wise choice, Naruto looked to his men, and gave a curt nod. At once the 20 warriors gave a sharp twist of the weapons in their hands, turning the blades to their backs before bringing all 20 down at once. Mizuki's cries filled the clearing. You have done well, my children. Gather the fallen and rest. I will deal with these. Silent visages turned and began to collect the pieces of armor, bone and weapons before they turned as one, large column and began to march back to their homes. All heading for the tomb. Naruto collected the scroll quickly and slung Iruka over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. He spared a glance at Mizuki but knew he wouldn't be going anywhere. If he died, he died. They had a good idea where he was heading after his Orochimaru-sama comment. Wasting no time, he made a beeline for the village. First stop, the hospital. His debriefing had been an interesting one. Again and again the Hokage had asked how he had managed to subdue Mizuki. Again and again he had told him that he had simply caught the man unaware while Iruka had kept him busy, that when he had seen the man trying to kill his sensei he had snapped and beat him mercilessly with a found branch. He never wavered from his story, so it had to be accepted. Though he did tell the old man had disappointed he was in him for never telling him about the Kyuubi. Something that the elderly leader was shocked that he had known, and silently vowed that Mizuki would die for revealing. He had asked, more out the desire to change the subject than anything, about what team he would be on. He had been told that after his impressive display with clones during the graduation that he had been specially requested to be under Kurenai Yuhi, the village's genjutsu mistress. Naruto had to fight the urge to smile at that. She was one of the pretty girls he had seen growing up. With a small smile and a nod Naruto had turned to leave, only to be stopped by the third and told that he would be there, if he was wanting to talk about his problems. Naruto gave a slight nod, but inside was annoyed that he would only now, after all these years, be willing to listen. He didn't need that. He already had someone that would listen, and better, would never judge him. Arriving back at his home he walked directly back inside the crypt and froze. His trap had been tripped. The bladed snare he had fashioned lay broken on the ground, the trap having apparently missed its mark to shatter on the stone, the scythe-like blade in several pieces scattered across the floor. His heart froze. Rushing inside he headed straight for the Megumi's chamber. And instantly fell to his knees, tears rushing down his cheeks as he started into the room. The throne sat empty, the floor around it scattered with bits of broken marble, the elaborate riches gone and his lamps overturned, all save one that offered a guttural, flickering light as the little bulb tried desperately to hold on. He felt his heart clench tightly, the doors of his emotions steadily clenching closed. She was his world, yet someone. Crawling forward through the stone shards, unmindful of the cuts appearing across his form as the stone bit deep, as if to accuse him of his failings, he reached his target. The strangely intact face of his goddess. With trembling hands he picked up the marble as gently as he could, running a thumb across its cheek once more as its pristine surface began to be covered with tears he wasn't aware he was shedding. His teeth clenched with shattering force. They will pay. His chakra flared. Another of the odd, blue pulses raced through the floors of the tomb, blasting away the dust and grime, long dead oil torches he had never been able to reach bursting to life and filling the tomb with gentle light even as things long still began to stir once more. Holding the face a bit closer he saw that the way it had broken had left it concave and smooth, not unlike a mask. With a bitter smile he placed the shattered stone onto his face, using a small flow of chakra to hold it in place. Almost at once his tears began to flow through the once vacant eye holes down marble cheeks as he made a tight fist, part of him noticing the long dead husk of the scorpion skittering closer to him before it moved up his arm and over his body. I made you a promise, me. He looked closer at the throne, the odd script now as legible as his textbooks and smiled. Xandri, I promised I would bring back our people, and I will, my queen. The Deshret shall rise once more. She had as many names as she did faces. It was a simple fact that all who dealt with women would learn, in time. Women had many faces. Joy, anger, sorrow. These were only three, yet in the world of ninja there were none that knew all the faces a kunoichi would possess. That reason was a simple one. Should they see them all, then they were destined to die. It was an immutable fact of the ninja world. She was called an uncommon beauty, and while she didn't ignore her looks she also didn't try and flaunt them. If she had to judge herself she would say she was a little too short in her mind, her hips a bit too wide, an unruly head of hair that refused to be tamed, and bizarre eyes that, in the right lighting, would scare even herself. There were few that would agree. Kurenai Yuhi was her name, and for once, she was having a good day. Very few men had approached her. Many of the civilian girls in the village were being a bit nicer for some unknown reason. She just got her first genin team, and there hadn't been a single sign of Asuma all day. Even Anko, her best friend, had been in an uncommonly good mood, something about having a new toy to play with. That always made her shudder. Ever since her problems with her former sensei, she was a bit too quick to cut, but at her core was still the same, fun-loving girl she had always been. It was just a pity that so few others could see it. Most seemed to think that she was a promiscuous woman due to her style of dress and panache for flirtatious behavior. Ludicrous. With that look, she ensured that only a certain kind of man would approach her. A kind that she could easily turn away, or if they persisted, she wouldn't feel bad about hurting. As much as the fun-loving girl still lived within her, she knew that her pain ran deeper than most could understand. The only one, she imagined, that may be able to understand her was oddly enough her new student. One Naruto Uzumaki. One more reason she was glad that she had gotten him on her team. With the joint training she had in mind for her little minions, she was hoping that they, or at least he, may forge a bond not unlike what she held with the woman. Anything to get her to take someone else to that blasted dango stand. Anyone that really knew her knew that she preferred fish, spicy fish at that, so why would the woman always take her to get those blasted little dumplings? Shaking herself from her mild rant, she pressed on. While she knew she would be on time for the meeting, a part of her always preferred to be a little early, a tick picked up from her own Jonin sensei long ago. Sparing a nod to the two Anbu at the gate, she made her way up the spiraling tower into the Hokage's office, pausing at the door for a moment as her nose wrinkled. Asuma. Making a quick hand sign, she shunted chakra to anywhere but her nose, briefly feeling lightheaded as her ears started picking up the mumbling through the door, her eyes stinging slightly and fighting the urge to readjust her clothing, the slight pinch of her bra standing out all the more with that extra bit of energy running through her. Knocking twice, she waited a moment before hearing the rather comforting voice of her Hokage before entering and giving the older of the Sarutobis a smile. She didn't hate Asuma by any means, but the man needed to learn how to take a hint. If he was smoking, she wasn't going to give him the time of day. It wasn't like his father's tobacco, that she could honestly say she rather liked. The sweet, often cherry-flavored, off-blue smoke was something that was almost pleasant for her. However, Asuma tended to prefer the raw tobacco from AIM. The rather industrial village had those pollutants seep into their leaf, and it was something you could smell and taste in the air. Something he would never take into account. She had done everything short of yanking the pack out of his vest and incinerating it to get the man to take the hint. Men. Kerni-san, punctual as always, I hope the day finds you well. Yes, Hokage-sama. Smirking slightly, the elderly leader waved her off somewhat. Now, the meeting hasn't started yet, no need to be overly formal right now. You could take a lesson from your friend. I am a grandfather, and hope to get back to doing that properly here in a few years. That made a small smile form across perfectly painted lips. As you wish. If I may, why were we all called here today? He absently pulled his pipe from his desk, beginning to fill it as he considered his answer. Officially, I'm just handing out the files on your genin for tomorrow's selection. Unofficially, I need to speak to you, Anko-chan, Ibiki-kun and Aruka-kun about what happened 3 nights ago. She gave a silent nod as she watched Asuma with her peripheral, refusing to let the man think she was eyeing him. Kurenai-san. Oh please no, not in front of the Hokage. What do you think of your team? She had to bite her tongue to keep from sighing in relief. I believe they possess remarkable potential. What about yours? Idly he pulled a cigarette from his vest, the pronounced ting of his lighter echoing through the office before flicking the striker a few times as he considered his response. I'm currently going to be heading up the next generation of one of our more famous ninja trios. Honestly, I can't complain. Though I'm going to have to rely on their clans quite a bit, but you've got a weapon freak, a Hyuga, and the outcast. All three I think should have been last picks, but you had the first choice. Why pick them? Why not the Uchiha, the Haruno, or the Yamanaka? She ground her teeth slightly as she moved closer to the Hokage, the smoke already grating on her, though the apparent lack of faith from her fellow Jonin may have played a bigger part in that. My team, Asuma, is of little concern to you, though I suppose I'll humor you. I chose the two most promising kunoichi in the class, something I know you understand, as well as a boy that I believe was overlooked in the school due to a situation beyond his control. You saw what I did. Making 23 clones like that is almost unheard of for a genin. If I can hone that skill into wide-range genjutsu, then he will be a force to be reckoned with. Hinata has perfect control, can be an expert tracker, and is already showing a skill for medicine. Tenten looks up to one of the Sannin and is stopping at nothing to get to her level. Trust me, my team is going to be a powerhouse when I'm finished with them. Both Sarutobi were doing their best not to shrink away from Brunette. They didn't realize how fiery she could be when pressed. Come now, Kurenai-san, I'm sure my son wasn't trying to be insulting. I happen to agree that these three have great potential. Young Anko will be assisting in your training, yes? She nodded. She's still officially not allowed to take a team, yet still desires to teach, so I offered a hand. And with the limited number of nuke nin coming in, I thought it better to keep her busy. A bored Anko is an interesting Anko. Ooh, Kurenai-chan, talking about me behind my back again. She froze at the purring voice, two hands snaking around her midsection to lightly rub her belly as hot breath washed over her ear. Her yelp was not terribly dignified, though the laughter from the two men didn't help. With a rough clearing of her throat, she pinched one of Anko's hands hard, causing the woman to squeak and pull away. Anko, behave. She grumbled a bit before dancing out of reach of her friend and, pausing only long enough to get the ever so slight nod from the Hokage, snatched the 3 files from the desk that bore the snapshots of her team. So these are the little monsters we get to play with, Nai-chan. She got a nod before she started to leaf through them, her whole being seeming to shift and take on a more professional feel. Gone was the somewhat teasing cock to her hip, no more were her eyes sparking with mirth, her jaw set and her lips thin as she slipped into mission mode, her odd pale brown eyes dancing over the papers as she seemed to go back to other files time and again. Wow, at first glance these seem terrible red, but you know I see a lot of potential here. Kurenai couldn't hide her smirk any more than the Hokage, while Asuma was starting to wonder if he had missed something. So what are your thoughts? She gnawed on her lip for a time before smirking. It's almost a perfect balance, not over-specialized, and not weak in any one area. The blonde will be the heavy hitter from the looks of it. The Hyuga has almost perfect chakra control and decent reserves thanks to her fighting style and can be a melee beast if we break her out of that shell. And Buns here, with a little coaching, could get as good as me at extracting information. I'd say a perfect deep recon, capture, retrieval, or assassination team. Kurenai gave a curt nod. Oh yes, she had hit the nail on the head. Although, it says here you're wanting to turn the blonde into a genjutsu user. Why? Primarily due to the fact that he has such remarkable control, despite having such massive reserves. With that kind of power, he may even be able to develop a genjutsu that could fool the Sharingan. Anko let out a low whistle, the look in her eyes showing just how quick her mind was working. I'll be damned, assuming he could increase the power and maintain control, and that's a big if. He could convince the body that the injuries or the setting was real, he could actually manage to kill if he does this right. My thoughts exactly. You're not planning on trying to get him to use it, are you? Anko looked to the Hokage like he was covered in something foul. You, of all people, ask me that. The elderly leader flinched at the pain in her voice. The very idea of using power from another was sickening to her. He knew as much, but really, who wouldn't feel that way if they had been through what she had. Forgive me, Anko-chan. There are times that even a professor can be absent-minded. A soft knock echoed through the room before he called for the person to enter. Quickly, two men entered the room, one a towering man seemingly made of a scowl, the head of the interrogation unit. Behind him, wheeling himself into the room, was Iruka, the man moving more than a little gingerly thanks to the apparent wrappings on his chest. Lord Hokage. Hokage-sama. Ah, now that the main players are here, we can begin. Iruka-kun, first I would like to say I'm sorry to call you here from your rest, you must in a great deal of pain. He gave a weak smile, looking far too pale for a man of his age, and nonsense, Hokage-sama, I live to serve. He gave him a small smile, very well. Now then, the main reason I've called you all here to discuss the events that had transpired that night. As some in this room are aware, Naruto has become aware of his burden. That caused a few eyes to widen. My lord, what will become of him? What was his reaction? Will we still be allowed to train him? Did he flee the village? The elderly leader once more raised his hands, attempting to calm his son, and the boy's sensei to be easy. Apparently after the revelation something had happened. You all felt the chakra spike from the forest, I presume. They nodded. Good. It would seem that when Naruto found out he, through rather selective means from Mizuki, was in severe emotional distress. After a last reassurance from Iruka before he succumbs to his injuries, Naruto apparently was able to subdue Mizuki with, thus far, unknown means. Ibiki-san. The scared special Jonin drew up to his full height before nodding. Yes, Lord Hokage. Naruto, upon delivering Iruka to the hospital for damage to his ribs that had resulted in a punctured lung, came before the Hokage and reported that he had engaged Mizuki with the help of the aforementioned Chunin and, upon seeing Iruka seemingly die, in the boy's words, coupled with the revelation of the fox, had snapped and beat Mizuki into submission with a found branch. However, the evidence does not support this statement. Explain. Nodding once more to his leader, he produced a few files and began to pass it around the group, the Hokage having a personal copy. As it can be seen from his injuries, he has indeed been bludgeoned. However, you can see from the bruising that it seems to have been an object with clearly defined edges. Riffling through a few pictures, Anko had to fight back her grin. Someone had seriously worked the man over, and it was clear that something a lot heavier than a branch had done this. What did Mizuki say? Her boss just shook his head. That's the problem. From what we can tell, he's gone completely insane. He insists that Naruto somehow had summoned the dead to fight for him, before they beat him into submission. Even said the kid had a crown. That caused a few to chuckle. It's possible he found an iron rod, or a dull sword out there, and in his anger just doesn't remember. Again he shook his head. No, we have scoured that area. Take a note of the scene photos. Whatever happened there, it was big. Even if the kid had somehow tapped into his power, it would have been different. The fox's chakra, naturally, is destructive, but it doesn't cut, it rends. No, whatever happened there, it was done with an edged weapon or weapons. I have requested some of the local swordsmen and blacksmiths investigate the area and report back the nature of the weapon. I will say this, I've never seen a cut that clean before on a tree, and if it was a weapon, why not just kill Mizuki? The Hokage just sat there for a time, his eyes closed, before letting out a sigh. It's clear that there is something new in the village, be it an unknown ninja, a new technique, or a weapon that has yet to be revealed. There is also a matter of some of the civilian and retired ninja in the village disappearing since that night. Thus far we have lost 4 such people. Now normally, with the graduation having just occurred, this would not be too much of a problem, as many that did not pass would be relocating to one of the surrounding civilian villages. However, it's the condition they were found in that's alarming. Ibiki. Yes. It seems that those that were found dead had every scrap of chakra drained from their system. There is one such ninja in the village that could accomplish such a deed, a genin named Akadu Yoroi. However, his location is accounted for at the apparent time of the deaths. Either training with his teammates at the time or at his part-time job at Aquifers. Kurenai arched an eyebrow at that. Such a technique would be powerful indeed for anyone, but a genin able to do such a thing. This boy and his teammates, I don't recall them graduating. Who's their sensei? The group's sensei, one Aoi Rokushu, became a missing nin after the theft of the Raijin no Ken 6 years ago. Since then they have been passed to what jonin have been available. The team's leader, Kabuto Yakushi, is the adoptive son of the head of the hospital and is an accomplished medic in his own right, helping to train many of our up-and-coming nurses. They've been genin for 6 years, yet have such accomplished skills, and their sensei is a missing nin. And the council calls me a security risk. While most just ignored the violet-haired woman's rant, Hiruzen's mind was busy working. Anko had a point. With a gesture unseen by the gathered ninja, he made a sign to the room's hidden black ops. And sent a few ninja to keep an eye on the group, regardless. As Ibiki-san has said, he has an alibi, therefore, in addition to the Mizuki incident, we must keep watch for those that may be new in town or possess exotic items. Kurenai, your team possesses a young woman that is known to have great interest in weapons. Try and ask her, as subtly as you can, about what could do such a thing. My lord, if I may make a suggestion. Of this generation of genin only Naruto has knowledge of what happened that night, and more specifically, where. I suggest that perhaps we set up this new clearing as a training ground. My team can meet there, and as an impromptu quiz I can ask Tenten what weapon could make such a mark. After a long moment he gave a slow nod. Agreed. However, make sure that when you do Naruto is not nearby. If he does know something he may try and influence her answer. My lord. He paused to start refilling his pipe. As much as I want to trust Naruto in this, all my attempts over the last few years to get close to him have come up short. I fear that his loyalty to the village may be lax. That caused several wide eyes. Iruka the only one that dared break the silence. Lord Hokage, surely you're not suggesting that Naruto, the one whose dream it is to be Hokage, could be a traitor. His features hardened, sharply reminding them all exactly who he was, not the kindly grandfather, but the fire shadow, and god of shinobi, Iruka-san. As much as I want to believe in Naruto, my first priority is to the village, and if he has become a threat to the people I am obligated to find out just how great it may become. You know as well as I do that he does not view me, or even you, in the same light that he once did, becoming increasingly distant to us. Anko's scowl seemed a sharp counterpoint in the room, cooling where the Hokages had been heating. He's a teenager for Kami's sake. We all pull away from our parents growing up. I mean, come on. You really think that that little ball of fuzz that used to spy on Nai-chan and I on the way to the academy is plotting all our deaths? Before her tirade could grow any further, there was a massive spike in chakra in the room, silencing all involved as they were crushed by the weight of the anger it held. Enough. Mitarashi-san, I know that you see this boy as a parallel to yourself in some ways, but the fact of the matter is that even using the crystal ball I cannot track him at all times. Either he, or some outside source is blocking our scrying attempts. Add to that that he keeps loosing the tails that we put on him, and yes, I have to ask myself that. So, you were having him followed, for how long? You at least had the courtesy of telling me. For a little kid like him I'd bet that he just got paranoid as all hell and just started running and hiding as a reflex. You know what this place is like. At the best they ignore him. Mitarashi, you're dismissed. Bu. Dismissed. She snapped a hasty salute before turning on her heel and leaving a group of stunned watchers. Some couldn't believe how she had reacted, but for two, they were shocked that the Hokage had thought so little of the boy, them wondering what his father may say if he was still there. Unknown to them all, one old man was wondering just how true her words had been. The last 3 days had been unique for Naruto. Why, you may ask, was it just these 3 days that would stand out? That was simple. He himself hadn't so much as seen the sun once in all that time, something of a rarity of the blonde. For you see, when Naruto had finally chanced looking up from his rage-fueled moment, he had been shocked to see he was surrounded by withered husks of what looked to be the very people who had once lived in his people's past, those that looked to have stepped out of the walls themselves, though they had aged horribly. His gaze had drifted to each face in turn, the cracked features, the crumbling bandages, all surrounded by the faded splendor of what they once were. Each were knelt around the vacant throne, seeming to wait for him to finally acknowledge them. With a hollow voice, one that seemed almost as old as they were, he spoke, "You, who are you?" The first, this one seemingly once dressed more magnificently, a tarnished, yet still quite impressive headdress of turquoise and gold, his robes tattered and falling from his body even as he tried to maintain his regal form. A rasping hiss, a small cone of dust married with flakes falling from lips long devoid of warmth, "My liege." What? Sire. What is your will? My will. We have awoken by your will. What are your orders? Naruto stared at the withered man for a long moment, after a time the figure shifting slightly. Even now Naruto could feel the faint weight of his crown, tendrils of knowledge snaking their way into his mind. Are you and the guards the extent of what lies here? Naruto now learned that the dead could indeed laugh. My liege, if we may, we can show you. For the next 3 days, though he was ignorant of the passage of that time, he was led ever deeper into the twisting tomb, rooms long sealed or hidden now open. The massive figures in the hall that he had once thought were mere depictions of gods were now alive, each saluting him as they passed, massive blades and stone arms making a dull crash as they slammed into their chests in a great X. The training halls that he had sweated in so much were now filled with rank upon rank of warriors. Each were not as well equipped as the guards that had come to his aid, some part of him knowing that these had served as his true soldiers, those that made the backbone of his armies. That gave him pause. When had he ever had an army? Such thoughts were banished as he watched them pick up the aged weapons and armors, and almost lovingly they began to polish, sharpen and mend all they put their stripped hands on. Deeper still they moved, passing massive doors that, when asked, he was told contained the charnel pits where his legions had been buried, others were the royal treasure rooms, still more were the armories meant for the kings, queens, and of course, the priests. One of these treasuries had been something Naruto couldn't help but stop at, something telling him, demanding him, to enter. Despite the protests of those around him, he cast the doors wide and strode in, his posture befitting a king. There, on an altar before him, was a great golden staff. The thing was thick, looking almost like a quarterstaff in some ways. Thought at the head of the staff was a massive carrion bird, its wings held aloft and showing that the feathers' tips were brought to a razor edge, the bird's eyes made of rubies, his beak forged of tapering crimson gold, giving the appearance of it having recently fed. The length of the shaft textured with feather upon feather. Priest, what is your name? Fetep, my liege, the 48th high priest of the Deshret, and the teacher of High Priestess Xandri. Naruto paled. Xandri. Where is she? Is she here? No, sire. Her place is elsewhere. He deflated a bit. I see. What of this staff then? I feel drawn to it. That, my king, is the staff of the Sky Lord, Alcazar the First. He was the first to begin to revere the great carrion of the eastern oasis of Ainai. Since then we have made it a point to entomb several with each king, queen and priest. These birds are holy, as they would cleanse the battlefields of the dead, preventing sickness and the fouling of the water. I've been meaning to ask you, you don't seem alarmed that you are, well, alive again. Again, the priests gave dark chorus chuckles, causing another blast of dust and dried flesh. You would naturally be curious, my young king, but it has long been known to the people that when we were needed once more that a king would call on our aid. Though we all prayed for such things to be unnecessary, we knew the day might come that we would be called away from paradise. Our allegiance is timeless, and we know that when the need passes that we will return to our sleep. Naruto's head bowed low as he gave small acknowledgments to each priest in turn. He was a bit comical to see a dead man surprised, For my part in this, I am sorry to have brought you back. To be honest, it was unintentional. I was just so mad. I guess I lashed out without realizing. Please, understand. Though I may be king in your mind, in mine, I am lower than you. I raised myself according to the reliefs, nothing more than a common soldier. Now Sire, please, whether it be by prophesy, choice or victory, you are our king, and we will serve loyally. You bear the crown, you would be unable to if you were anything but our lord. Without missing a beat, the gathered priests, 13 in all, dropped smoothly to a knee, something that didn't seem possible with their aged bodies, before crossing their arms before their chests, a sign of bondage and servitude to the king. What is your command? Giving a small smile, Naruto nodded and made a small gesture for them to stand. Tell me more of this staff. Sire, this staff is a symbol of leadership of Alcazar, but also served as a powerful weapon. Its blade was said to be able to cleave a sea of sand in but a single sweep, and the gaze of the great carrion would smite his foes with the raw, untamed heat of the desert. It is a formidable weapon. I see. Most impressive. And what of the drawbacks? As you can see, my lord, it is quite large, and shines brightly in the sun, a fine thing for troops to rally behind, but for a single warrior, without shield, chariot or steed, it can be a glaring beacon to draw foes to you. Alcazar's son used such a thing to lure his enemies into traps, though that lead to his demise. Naruto gave a small smile as his eyes danced over the simple, yet elegant weapon, his hand already moving to grasp it, when suddenly, gnarled, dried fingers locked around his wrist. My liege, forgive me for overstepping my bounds and daring to lay a hand on you, but this staff is one that you must not treat lightly. It has killed any outside of Alcazar's line that has dared to touch it. Naruto gave the priest a reassuring smile. Then I shall be the first. As I said, Fitep, I was drawn here. I do not think the staff will harm me. I appreciate your concern for me, but this is something I will need to find Megami-chan's destroyer, and be an effective ruler to you all. Please, trust me. If I am to be a good leader, a good servant to you all, I need to be as strong as I possibly can. Another first, a dead man looked scandalized. Sire, you are our lord. We are your servants, soldiers, slaves. You Kano. Fitep, this crown has shown me many things. It showed me the rich history of our people, our culture, our faith and traditions, and yes, while I may lead, should you not follow, not pledge to listen, to serve, then all this crown is a fancy hat. Nothing more. No, a king is nothing without his people. While you all may only be here for a time, you are all infinitely more experienced in the powers that return life to this place, and by your suggestions then I will be more effective in battle, commerce, building and diplomacy. Without you all, I just have mindless soldiers. But if you're with me, and I listen, then we will have a force that will make the very gods envious of our splendor. While the sight was lost on him, several of those surrounding him seemed to stand a little straighter, their features losing some of their cracked age as his power pulsed and flowed through the temple. The eyes of the staff flashed. My lord, if you feel this way, why don't you listen to my warning? The staff. As I said, it called. What kind of leader would I be if I didn't listen? With that his hand extended. The tomb shook. For Anko her day had been, largely, one of utter and complete shit. First she gets into a fight with her surrogate grandfather over a boy she only ever saw in passing, then the dango stand on the way to her home was closed, the little paper sign just stating, cold. Then she had run across one of the little annoyances from the bar that never seemed to be able to take a hint. Really, she had decided to be nice once and buy a guy a drink after his sob story over losing a girl. Now he wouldn't leave her alone. Thanking the fact that they didn't teach the body flicker technique until you made special Jonin, she was able to beat a hasty retreat. Though it was one of the last places that she normally wanted to end up at. A cemetery. Though it wasn't so much the plot of land, what it meant or what it contained, It was the fact that her intended perch had suddenly shaken violently, that coupled with the seal on her neck attempting to flare with the use of her chakra and the general chaos of trying to reorient yourself when you are coming back from such a jutsu, and the results were less than pleasant. A widening of eyes, a sudden sense of vertigo, a sudden pain in her forehead, and the humiliation of being face down, ass up, for all to see. One more good thing about cemeteries: there were never very many people in them, unless there was a funeral that day, and a funeral is something this place hadn't seen in 100 years. She quickly rolled over and sprang to her feet before looking about. The place was just as desolate as when she had first come here, years ago, when she had gotten curious and followed the little blonde boy she had seen running through a back alley, and the way he had changed as the years passed. She was no fool. She knew exactly why Kurenai had requested her help on the team. She knew how the boy had been ignored over the years, always just a hair's breadth from the violence that the populace could exact on him, so much like her, in a way, that it was scary. Still, to choose to live in a tomb rather than an apartment, even if you knew that place had been watched, was a bit extreme. Still, she couldn't deny that it had been, apparently, a good change for him, if his looks and skills were anything to go by. While she had been curious, ungodly so, as to what was inside, she hesitated. She had seen the traps he had put at the entrance, and if her time in T&I had taught her anything, is that the simple traps were the ones you spotted. It was the ones deep inside that only trackers and field engineers could spot that would end you, so using a blind shunshin inside the structure was a no-no. The strangest thing about the whole situation, however, hadn't been the fact that she would watch the boy like this. It was the fact that after her event with her sensei, that these odd little excursions, the memories of this place, was all that she could hold on to. If it had to deal with the blonde, then she could remember it, almost with perfect clarity. She didn't have her mother's face, but she could remember him covered in dust leaving the tomb, then releasing the chakra and letting it fall to the ground. She couldn't remember childhood friends unless she had spotted him when they were out and about. It's one reason that she insisted on being so close to Kurenai instead of Yugao, despite her insistence that they had been closer than she and Kurenai had ever been. The boy that caught rabbits, the one that would drag a bolt of cloth into those shadow depths, make tools of stone, train until he bled, and more than anything, suffered in silence. The death of the matron of the little orphanage that he and Tenten had once stayed in had happened the same year that Orochimaru had betrayed the village, the same year that she had been branded. The same year that they both had changed. The blonde ball of joy and sunshine had become quiet and serious, and she had turned inward and tuned out all who she couldn't remember, save the Hokage. She began to walk alone, just like Naruto. So of course Kurenai had made a big stink about her helping in the training, and she, in turn, saw it as an opportunity to force Kurenai into buying her all the dango she wanted. Win-win. Still, in all the years that she had been in the village, she had never felt a quake like that. In all the time she had spent following the little boy, watching how he grew, she had never felt that kind of power come from him, or this place. Now she was intrigued, and an Anko who was in such a state could be a dangerous thing indeed.